Hello, everyone, and welcome to our discussion this afternoon or this evening, the Trauma Informed Church. My name is Joanna Daniel. So, what is the Trauma Informed Church, and what does that look like? How do we become a church that is trauma informed, that is inclusive of everyone? We're going to hear some more about that this afternoon and how your church can become that place where everybody can be comfortable. So, as we start, I like to start with Isaiah 43, verse 2. When you pass through the waters, I will be with you, and through the rivers, they shall not overflow you. When you walk through the fire, you shall not be burned, nor shall the flames scorch you. That reminds me of just people who experience suffering and pain and the promises that are in the word of God that is helpful to people who are in pain. And I believe Isaiah is full of promises that is helpful to people who are suffering. And in particular, this verse, as we look at End It Now and what it means for people who have experienced trauma and abuse. So what is trauma? I'm using a definition that is given by the .gov.uk website. Trauma results from events, series of events, or sets of circumstances that is experienced by an individual as harmful or life-threatening. While unique to individual, generally the experiences of trauma can cause lasting adverse effects, limiting the ability to function successfully and achieve mental, physical, social, emotional, or spiritual well-being. So trauma is really impacting for individuals who experience it. And if you are in the audience, in the congregation this evening, I should do a trigger warning that sometimes the content of conversations like this can be triggering. If that is you and you find yourself struggling, I'd like you to take a deep breath, just put your foot level on the floor, sip some water, hold your head down, say a quick prayer, or, time you might need to go to the restroom, grab some water outside, take some deep breath outside and come back in, just to help yourself ground yourself and to help yourself to be able to get through the rest of the presentation. If you're sitting beside someone and you notice that they're struggling, you can ask if it's okay if you hold their hands. You can ask if it's okay if you give, if you put your arm on their shoulder, just ask to touch it before you do that so that they know that they're supported. Okay. So there's a poem that I found a while ago, posted on Facebook, that I felt was really appropriate for this presentation this evening. And I'd just like to read that poem. It says, I feel your pain and long to touch the hurt and make it melt away. Yes, I know that I can't really see the breadth and depth of this dark valley you're in. I cannot truly know how sharp the knife is in your soul, for it is you in its path, not me. But I have known other valleys, and in my heart still bear knife wounds, scars. Even so, I would walk your road and take your pain if I could. I cannot. And yet, perhaps in some way, I can be a hand to hold in the darkness. In some way, try to blunt the sharpness of pain. But if not, it may help a little just to know I care. And I believe most people who are experiencing pain, sitting right beside you in church every week, just want to know that somebody cares. And we can't feel what everybody feels. We'll never be able to experience what everybody experiences, thankfully, because we wouldn't survive it. But if people know that we care, that is really soothing and comforting. And sometimes it's our care that demonstrates the care and love of Jesus to many people who have never had care and nurture in their whole lives. So the church has this really important role that we can play. I want to anchor today's presentation on the verse in St. John 4 from verse 1 to 29, and we can stop and read 1 John 4 from verse 1 to 29. And I want us to think about these questions. When you're in your churches, in your groups, and read in 1 John 4, 1 to 29, I want you to think about these questions after you've read the verse and use this as a place to discuss. Why did Jesus ask her to give him a drink? Why did he ask the woman at the well to give him a drink? Why did he lead her to the conversation about her family situation? And what made her such a powerful witness after she spent time with Jesus? So what is the trauma-informed church? The trauma-informed church is aware of the impact of trauma on the lives of its members. So we're not just We're aware of the difficulties and the challenges that people in our congregation that are sitting among us have experienced. And in line with today, which is ended now, and it's around ending abuse, the Trauma Informed Church is aware of the impact of abuse on the lives of its members. And so it's across the church. We recognize it in Sabbath school, and we recognize it in Pathfinders, and we recognize it in women's ministries and men's ministries, and how it can impact evangelism. When we are doing evangelism and we are having people to come in, we're aware of the impact of trauma and the lives of our members. When we think about the statistics of just sexual trauma and the number of people in our congregation, at least a third would have had this experience. The Trauma Informed Church bears this in mind, and it informs programs, it informs planning, it informs how we speak to people, and how we do evangelism, how we serve potluck, and just how we are as a church. It makes us really aware of how much responsibility we have and care that we can offer to each other, and how much we can be a soothing comfort to somebody who turns up to church every Sabbath. And the Trauma-Informed Church is sensitive and compassionate. The environment is safe for everyone to worship in. And that's really key, really important for us to understand. And we're going to learn some more about what that might look like today. So 5 keys for recovery ministry in our church. So first, the Trauma-Informed Church, and I'm going to go into each one of these throughout this discussion, will build a leadership team. The Trauma-Informed Church will build a leadership team. The Trauma-Informed Church understand barriers that victims may encounter. And I'm going to say the Trauma-Informed Church will build a safe leadership team, and what that might look like as we go through and talk about that. It will understand barriers that victims may encounter, that there's some people that might have some barriers to accessing services. The ground is not level for everyone, but I believe this is where the church can play a really significant role in helping these victims, these people. The Trauma-Informed Church listen effectively. And so what is effective listening? How do we do that? How do we listen effectively? Sometimes people say, you're a counselor, Joanna, so you can do it. You're trained. I believe that this is a gift, and the Holy Spirit, God is willing to give this gift to many people in our church. Paul in Corinthians talk about the gifts that are in our church. And I know many people have that gift, and the Holy Spirit wants to give many more the gift of effective listening, so that we can be a place that is safe for everyone. The Trauma-Informed Church keeps confidentiality. Things that are discussed stays within the circle that is being discussed, and people feel safe enough to share because they know that they won't be topics of conversation maliciously, but they'll be listened to, held, heard, and cared for. And the Trauma-Informed Church provides safety and support for people. So what is safety? Safety is physical safety and emotional safety. And things like confidentiality provides emotional safety. And then there's physical safety, where we're keeping an eye on people, where we're understanding, safeguarding, and where we're putting things in place to ensure that people are kept safe. Now, that this might feel like a lot. And if you are a leader listening to this, you might think, how are we going to achieve this? Don't worry, it's really doable. And we'll see that when we each play our part as we're meant to, because the church is a body, then it works and it comes together. So let's look at the first key in building a trauma-informed church. It's build a trauma-informed church leadership team. So leadership kind of set the tone for everything. When the leaders are on board with certain things, then it makes it easier for the rest of the congregation to follow. So if the leadership team might look like the board, does the board buy into trauma-informed church leadership? Do they understand what it means? Are they committed to providing support and care and safety and confidentiality for people that they are serving, that they have signed up to serve for a year or for 2 years? Now, I know that this doesn't mean that leadership doesn't have their own struggles and doesn't have things that are going on in their lives too. Of course you do. Of course you do. And it doesn't mean that you take on the brunt, leadership takes on the brunt or the full load of the responsibility. It just means that you are the one that is guiding the charge, and then people will follow you. So what does this look like? for leadership to understand the lasting impact of trauma, the behavioral consequences, the mental health consequences. And mental health is a really key thing. For example, people who experience adverse childhood experiences, that means trauma in their childhood from 18 down, are more likely to have depression. We know through the World Health Organization that depression is an epidemic on its own. And so there are likely people in your church that are experiencing depression or anxiety, and the root of that is trauma. So we understand leadership, and this might be a training need. And if it is, that's okay. If it's okay that leadership is saying, I don't know, I don't understand, and I don't know how to do this, then that's okay, because that's a need that can be met. So you understand the behavioral, mental, physical consequences of trauma, the lasting impact of trauma, and that it doesn't, for some people, it doesn't go away and it's not easily fixed. And bearing that in mind, that's where the care comes in. That's when the support comes in. That's when the love comes in, because we can put behavior in a frame, and we can understand that, okay, so this is what some of the behaviors of people that experience trauma looks like. We recognize also the impact on people's spiritual lives. There are many people who will not be able to see God as Father or understand, especially when the trauma happens in church. It really does confuses people about God and about the perpetrator. If they were in leadership, if they were preaching and teaching, if they were, spiritual people with spiritual authority, that are the perpetrators. It really confuses people and have a significant impact on people's spiritual lives. So it's not because people don't want to serve, run a department. It's not because they don't love the Lord. It's sometimes the trauma is sometimes the root of it. And just an awareness of that is really helpful in knowing how to interact, how to communicate, and how to manage sometimes conflicts or discrepancies that might arise in church. A trauma-informed church leadership, as I said before, will understand adverse childhood experiences and its impacts on families for generations. It puts people in a vulnerable position, sometimes for generation, because this is passed down from generation to generation. And will also understand the intergenerational impact of trauma. They will identify the effects of ACE, including depression, which I mentioned before, anxiety, panic attacks, sleep disturbances, behavioral changes, stress, low self-esteem, and the list goes on. So leadership will at least have an awareness of this. Most organizations, schools, for example, colleges, universities, are becoming more trauma-informed. I believe for the church to become more trauma-informed, it's an amazing thing, because if, for example, people in leadership in Pathfinders having this knowledge, it really does inform how the whole department is run. Also, leadership sets the tone and others follow. Leadership can be patient when behavior seems undesirable, can ask questions such as, what do you need? Not question the behavior, but can look and see what the person needs as opposed to respond to the behavior. See what the behavior is telling. What kind of story is this behavior telling? And can also, and this is really important, respond appropriately to allegations of abuse. The stories of inappropriate response are many, and many people have left the faith. Many people have given up on God because this last one is not managed well, and because leadership doesn't understand how to hold space and how to be neutral, or how to be with and listen to, then lots of people have left. And this is what informed today's title, Go Find My Sheep, because I believe that we have a responsibility to love and support and to stay alongside when there's an allegation of abuse, and to support people, because oftentimes whole families leave, not because they're angry or bitter, but because they're hurt and sad. And that's how the hurt and sad is being manifested. And number two, another key is understand barriers victims may encounter. What are some of these barriers? Some of these barriers are in church. Some of the barriers are in the community. If we understand the barriers, then that will be helpful. Language is a barrier. I go to a church where there are many different cultures in our church, and there are people that I can not communicate with effectively because of the language difference. And so I imagine these people, we live in an English in the English speaking country, imagine for these people wanting to make an allegation of abuse or wanting to access services. There'll be a really significant issue for them because they won't be able to. And it can be a really daunting task to be within this pain and not knowing where to take it, not being able to communicate effectively with organizations and services. And some services provide translation, others don't, because it comes with a cost. Now, I'm not saying the church should meet the cost, but if we're aware of the barriers to access services, then maybe there's something that we can do to help stay alongside, support people. There are cultural barriers, cultural differences, cultural differences that are present that will make reporting abuse difficult, that will make talking about abuse difficult, that will make even acknowledging difficult. And so sometimes things will come out in behavior. Financial barriers, where sometimes a woman in a domestic abuse situation, sometimes there's a huge homelessness population within this group of people, not just women, but also men. Finances plays a significant role in whether or not somebody can leave an abusive relationship or not. And so lots of people have had to stay in the pain and in the suffering with the post-traumatic stress symptoms that results, with the depression, with the anxiety, with the suicidal ideation, with all the things that goes with it. So again, it's not something that we necessarily can fix. And maybe there are ways that we can fix. Community services department perhaps can support in providing food or clothing or a place to go and listen. And we don't have to fix. When we're listening, when people want us to listen, sometimes they don't want us to fix it. They just want somebody to talk to. Fear of judgment. Judgment is a massive reason why people don't share. But when we are open, and when the language runs throughout our programming in church, then people, the judgment, the fear of judgment reduces, because this is an everyday language in church. So if trauma, if abuse becomes everyday language in church, if healing and mental health becomes everyday language in church, then people are more willing to share their stories and not suffer in silence. A barrier is a waiting list. Lots of services have waiting lists. So people sometimes, when I know here in the UK, sometimes if somebody goes to their GP to access counseling, it might be a good 6 months before they can access the service. And sometimes when they're in crisis and there's a waiting list, it takes longer. And if the crisis is past, they might feel that they're okay, so they don't go and access service until the pattern repeats and the crisis keeps happening. And so these people continually live in crisis. And we can't continually live in emotional crisis before it starts to impact us physically and nervous system starts to break down, and the result is physical illnesses. So how can the church help in this, understanding this barrier? So one, understanding the barrier, not just do a referral and leave people. Follow up. How are you getting on? Did you sign up to the service? How long is the waiting list? How long are you required to wait? And while you might not have the skills to listen and to help, but as long as you're providing pastoral care and people have a place that they can go talk or somebody to sit with them, it really helps them in the holding period while they're waiting for services to become available. And there is this one that is really challenging for a lot of people in many countries: lack of access to public funds. When this person, and sometimes it's a cultural issue, if the person is not a resident of the country, they're attending your church, there's an allegation of abuse, they have no money, and they can't access public funds, and they're stuck. And there's this stuckness that results in mental health crisis, results in the impact on their spiritual lives, results in just living in a place of fear, wondering, where is God and can he help? And we can help by being a place to listen. We can help by being a safe space that people can come and talk about what it feels like to wait, what it feels like to not access. And, when we are willing to listen, then, the Holy Spirit will give us ideas about how to creatively help people solve their problems. But if we are in a culture where everybody is individual. My problem is mine and yours is yours. Then we're individually dealing with our problems and there's no community that is being developed. I believe for us to move to a more community-centered church, when we are able to think about people and each other in this way, we're providing that warmth and community. And nobody wants to leave a loving community. People want to stay, and they'll tell their friends, come to my community, because ultimately we're lifting a price, and it's come see a man who have told me everything about me. Is not this the Christ? As we looked at in St. John 4. The trauma-informed church will become acquainted with local resources designed to help traumatized people. What are those resources? What are those services in your area that looks after people? Become familiar with them, build relationships with them, so you have a real easy referral pathway that you can put people through. Facilitate getting professional help and resources for people. And that might be not just through putting on a program. I go to many churches to speak, but when I go, there's no follow-up. And so one of the things I like to do is ask what's going to happen next, because I know that this, for example, will stir up quite a lot of things for people, and having a next step will be really important and significant in helping people to find a place to move to. Okay, now a group activity, a discussion for you to do in groups within your church right now. Discussion question: what can your church do to help people when they face these barriers to access services? The language barrier, the financial barriers, the cultural barriers, the fear of judgment, waiting lists, and lack of access to public funds for services. Now, be kind as you're having this conversation. Be willing to listen to each other. Just know that everybody might have a different opinion about it, and people's opinions might be really strong. You might have a different views around what this might look like, or whether this is even necessary or needed. Be Christ-like in your conversations as you're talking about it, and be willing to listen to each other's viewpoints as you do this discussion. Number 3, the trauma-informed church will listen effectively. What is effective listening? How do we do that? One thing, when we're listening effectively, we're not listening with judgment. We have no filter on, or we're aware of our filter. Because I like to say we're all judgmental. None of us is without judgment. We judge each other. Everybody does it. The difference is being aware of that and not use it as a filter when we're listening to people. So what does filtering mean? Filtering means that we're passing things that people say through how we feel and think, because we all think we're right. We all think our judgment's right. We all think the way we view things are right. We all think our opinion is right. We all do, because we're humans, and sometimes we're self-centered like that. But effective listening means that we can put away how we feel and be able to listen to the person, listen to what they're saying as they say it, and not how we think it should be. So say, for example, the last conversation, the last group activity that you just had, how did you listen to your sister or your brother and to what they had to say? How did you feel when they were saying it? Did you feel like you were right and they were wrong? Were you able to listen and take on board their opinion? Maybe not to change yours, but just to listen to it and hear it. And so let's look some more about listening effectively. We want to look at some of the barriers to effective listening. Societal views about abuse is a barrier. We sometimes immediately don't feel like people who've experienced abuse, it's valid. How they feel is valid. I've had people say that to me. All they need to do is pray, Joanna. Somebody said they don't really need anything other than prayer. And prayer is effective. Prayer is amazing, because God is amazing. But God has blessed people with the skills to work with people who will experience this kind of pain and the depth of the pain, so that they can listen effectively. So people are struggling with societal views about how they feel, whether or not the things that they experience, whether or not it was justified, what happened to them. And this is a real challenge. The values of the listener also impacts. You might be listening to a woman who experienced domestic abuse. How do you feel about the fact that she left? What's that like for you? What feeling does that stir up and bring up for you? That could be a barrier. You might be listening to a man who has experienced domestic abuse, and he is thinking about that. What are you telling him? And why are you saying that? How do you feel as he talks to you about his experiences? Effective listening means just hearing the story and being able to manage how you feel and deal with your feelings and not let it interfere with what the speaker is saying. And that's when people feel really heard and cared for, when we can just hear them. The personal views of the listener also plays a key role in how we hear, whether or not it's a filter. How do I feel about that? When somebody's talking to us, what we think about what they're saying provides a filter. Our personal views can be something that shuts the conversation down or be open to listening. So if somebody's sharing in their Sabbath school group, how is that heard? If a child has disclosed abuse, how is that heard? Your personal views about the perpetrator might prevent you from being able to listen effectively. Now, as I said, we all have judgment. And if you know that your personal views about this person, because you're close to them, prevents you from providing appropriate listening service to this person, then it's best if you pass them on to somebody else and you don't provide that service, and let yourself be okay with that. The listener's view of abuse, lecturing or giving advice is a barrier to people speaking, because sometimes people don't want advice. People just want you to hear them. And to be able to sit with someone and hear them and to listen to them, it takes patience, it takes kindness and compassion. It takes a love for people for us to be able to do that. And denying another person's feelings is a real sore point. It really is painful when somebody's sharing their experience and you're denying their feelings. You shouldn't feel sad. You shouldn't feel angry. You must do this or you should do that. Should, must, have tos when we're listening to people shouldn't be a part of the conversation. And I just say shouldn't as I'm talking to you about this. But try to not let that be a part of the conversation as you are just listening and not prescribing how they should feel and what that should look like. Effective listening means giving time to listen, taking time to sit with someone. So if you know you don't have the time, perhaps it's best to not start. It might be more honoring of the person to say, I really only have 5 minutes now. I know that won't do you justice. I really want to hear you. Can we arrange to speak tomorrow or after lunch? That's more honoring. They feel more respected and valued, as opposed to you're doing it, but you're not quite there. You're not present because you don't have time and your mind is not focused and your body language is saying, I need to go. Listening with empathy is really a key skill. Now, everybody can have empathy. We can all learn how to empathize. If you just think about what it felt like for you when anybody listened to you and was empathetic to what you were saying, how did that feel? That's what you're offering somebody else. It's a beautiful, warm feeling. And if we offer that to people, the person sitting next to us in church, the warmth of the church will be felt by strangers when they come, and they won't want to leave because it's a warm place. Nobody wants to leave love. Everybody will stay. And listening without judgment, without judging them, without judging what happened, without telling them how they should feel or shouldn't feel. Listening to their story as they tell it and not how we think it should be. Just being there, being present and listening. James 1 verse 19 is a beautiful example of how we should listen. The advice that was given is we should let every man be swift to hear, slow to speak, and slow to wrath. And so when we're swift to hear, when we're hearing and slow to speak, that means we're not planning what we're going to say in response. We're just listening. And for me, the slow to wrath part means that I can tell when my judgment is coming up because I can feel it. What does it feel like? I feel upset. I feel angry. I feel my shoulders and and I'm fuming. I can feel it. So we can take a deep breath and we can listen and we can be swift to hear. And Proverbs 25 verse 11 said, a word fitly spoken is like apples of gold and pitchers of silver. That's beautiful, isn't it? A word that is fitly spoken, a word that is spoken in that season to someone is beautiful to them, and it provides warmth and care. And number 4, we keep confidentiality. We're not disclosing what people are saying to us when they say it to us. We're not sharing their stories without their permission. We're asking for permission to share their stories before we share it. Now, confidentiality doesn't mean that if somebody is being harmed, we're going to keep that story, or if somebody was harmed or harming someone, then we have to share that information. But the confidentiality in this respect is when somebody share their stories, can we just listen? When somebody's telling us how they feel, can we listen without sharing it with anyone? There's something I want to say around confidentiality, and it's capacity to listen. And capacity means that if you think about a jar that is full, it doesn't have capacity to hold anything else, because if you pour anything, it's going to spill over. I believe oftentimes when confidentiality is broken in church, it's because people don't have capacity. Their jars are full and they can't listen to anything else. Now, if you know that you are that person, don't attempt to start the listening. Give some space in your own life. Look at what you need and get support for yourself before you start to listen. Because if not, it's going to spill over and it really causes a lot of hurt. That's why people leave as well. You know, you hear it all the time. The church is not safe. People are not confidential. And we want to be able to fix this. And I believe that we can. So confidentiality means also listening without prejudice, without your own story overwhelming you, as I said earlier, having a desire to help and not feeling the need to share what you've heard with anyone else. Another group activity for you to do, and you can, in about 2 minutes, in what ways can you help create safe spaces in your church for people who experience abuse? If you are here and you have experienced abuse and you feel comfortable to share, this is time when you could perhaps tell people, what would you want? What would work for you? How can the church be a safe place for you as you are healing? And number 5, the church can provide safety and support. Now, this is a really key thing, safety. I mentioned it throughout our conversation, and it's more of what we've talked about, how the church can be warm, and people coming into a warm environment will not want to leave. They'll want to stay and invite their friends to come see a man. So we can plan for the overall well-being of all members. That makes it safe. People with mental health, people who've experienced abuse, people who have disclosed, families of the person who have disclosed, so that we can be protective and caring. Provide ways for people to find emotional support. While the church might not provide a counseling service, you can refer people to services that is going to be helpful to them. Create opportunities for building relationships. Now, what might some of that look like? We're going to talk about that later on. So let's look at safety. Safety is when people feel comfortable asking for what they need. People only ask for what they need when they feel safe. Otherwise, they're going to deny themselves their needs. And we want people to be able to ask for what they need. We listen to what is needed. People trust that their stories will be heard and will be held, right? So they're comfortable asking for what they need. They know they'll be heard and held, and that makes them feel safe and safe to be, safe to serve. You won't need to really pressure anybody to serve in any departments, but because they've experienced that, they're happy to serve. It's a happy place. It's a happy church. So it's a warm church. The singing is vibrant and the worship is vibrant, and the pastor's job and the leader's job are easier when we can provide this kind of safety. It's a place of trust where people can trust. And because you can trust, transparency exists. People can be honest. Leaders are honest and trustworthy people. Expectations are clear. This is what I can do. This is what I can't do. Feelings are welcomed. I am sad. I feel depressed. I'm anxious. People will listen to us. And so trust and safety is developed in this kind of environment. And we can create groups. I am a believer in groups. I believe it's a wonderful, nurturing thing to have groups where people can talk, people have shared interest or experiences. And so it's safe to talk about the sexual trauma or the way you feel about divorce, especially if it's connected to abuse, and grief support, where people can talk about how they feel about their loss. And these are nurturing spaces, warm, loving spaces where people create friendships. And much of what we've talked about this afternoon will be captured in these groups. So here's another group activity. If you were to pick one of these support groups to run at your church as a ministry, which one would you do? Which one is most needed in your church? And I think we don't have to do a survey. If we're talking to people and interacting and we're providing this kind of support as we've been talking throughout, then you'd know which one would be more needed in your church. There's some that people are not so open and wanting to talk about, but I believe that when we start to talk about it from the front, then people will want to come. I've run survivors of sexual abuse group for many years, and we currently do a grief support group, but there are many more divorce recovery. There are many more groups that can be run that people won't feel like they have to leave. They wouldn't have to leave to go anywhere else to find what they need, because everything will be in-house. So effective listening, what does that look like? Effective listening is crucial and for people's healing. Here are some of the things that might hinder effective listening. Effective listening. Effective listening is crucial in a healing journey. Some roles a listener performs can hinder it. This next exercise helps identify wrong behavior while listening. So the group activity, and maybe people can do roles here. You can play different roles. Somebody might be a critic, an independent. Somebody might be an editor. An editor is going to fix what people say. Somebody says, I feel sad. And the editor will tell them not to feel sad and tell them how to feel instead. And somebody can play the role of a caring friend or a preacher. I'm going to tell you some scriptures and some quotes about how to feel, as opposed to how you're feeling now. And the manager will manage how you feel and try to, it's not necessarily a caring person, but more a tasking person. And know-it-all, the person who is a know-it-all will solve all the problems. So if you put yourself in groups, and if you can have 6, 7 roles, and each play a role, see what that feels like. If you can have somebody who is sharing their story of abuse in this, and have all these roles, talk to that person and see what that feels like. What does that feel like as you, for example, the caring friend, what did it feel like listening to the critic as they talk to as they share, or the know-it-all person? How did that feel hearing that? And let's share. This is a quote from Patriarchs and Prophets, page 534. We're all woven together in a great web of humanity, and whatever we can do to benefit and uplift others will reflect in blessings on ourselves. It's a beautiful thing when we can help others, because in helping others, we're helping ourselves. 1 Thessalonians 5 verse 17 says, therefore, encourage one another and build each other up, just as in fact that you are doing. Keep encouraging and building each other up, creating safe, warm spaces for people to worship in. And they'll tell their friends, come to my church, because it's a warm, safe space where you can be seen and heard and cared for.